Who's been holding up the damn elevator?
Often considered one of the best, if not the best entry into the Star Trek movie series, a statement that is hard to argue against, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan is a film that has yet to be topped by future entries into the franchise. Yeah, you can argue that the visual effects got better with time, well, mostly anyway, but this film set the bar high going forwards. This is down to its gripping story filled with drama, with depth to its main characters, coupled with excellent set pieces such as the battle within the nebula. Star Trek VI and First Contact do come close, but as we discussed in a recent livestream, this film just wins out. I would even argue that it's up there with some of the genre's best, and in my opinion, it stands shoulder to shoulder with even The Empire Strikes Back. I'm looking forward to seeing what comments I receive after that statement. Although its predecessor, Star Trek the Motion Picture, did make money, it was met with a mixed reception. The production was fraught with issues with an increasing budget and an ever-changing script. All of this was put on the shoulders of Gene Roddenberry by studio executives, so he was moved into a consultant's role for sequels and future films in the franchise. This meant that Roddenberry had very little control going forwards. So, executives at Paramount turned to their TV division in an attempt to make the sequel on a smaller budget by people who are used to working with tighter restrictions. The sequel was greenlit purely because there was an appetite for Star Trek, with executives realising that fans didn't really get what they wanted from the first film. Also, science fiction and science fantasy had exploded into the mainstream due to the success of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, with studios looking to jump on the bandwagon, and Paramount clearly had the right property to do so, if done in the right way, that is. Harve Bennett, a veteran TV producer, was the man tasked with bringing Star Trek II to the big screen. He and co-writer and producer Jack B. Soward set about watching every episode of the original series in order to find something in which to base the movie on. They came across the episode Space Seed, so the decision was made early on for the film to be a follow-up to this episode, with Khan being the main protagonist. However, the writing of the script wasn't as straightforward as they hoped, racking up 5 versions of the script with different ideas, but found it difficult to focus the story in one direction. In the meantime, they were also in search for a director. One name that was tabled was Ron Howard. He was a fan of Star Trek, and his brother Clint was in an episode of the original series, The Corbomite Maneuver. However, he was turned down by Bennett. I think it would have been interesting to see what a Ron Howard Star Trek movie would have looked like, but another name that was tabled was Nicholas Meyer. Meyer met with Sowards and was shocked to learn that the film had already been booked into theatres for the summer of 1982, so he asked to read the 5 versions of the script. Over the course of 12 days, Meyer had rewritten the script, taking elements from different versions of the previous ones. Having never watched Star Trek previously, Meyer quickly became familiar with what was needed for this movie, which was the emphasis on the main characters and the struggles between them. He leaned towards a more swashbuckling vibe, treating Starfleet more as a military organisation like the Navy, rather than what he described Starfleet as in the original series, depicted more like the Coast Guard. Meyer also took inspiration from Horatio Hornblower for the characterisation of Kirk, with Khan following a similar arc to that of Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. He didn't receive a writer's credit for his work on the script, but it was this work that ultimately won him the job of director, as he clearly understood what was needed. Sowers described him as a guy that just simply got it. Originally, Leonard Nimoy wasn't interested in returning, but was convinced to do so by Harve Bennett, promising him one thing that an actor couldn't resist: a great death scene. At this point in Nimoy's career, he had grown weary of playing Spock, having written a book titled I Am Not Spock. He saw this as an opportunity to finally put the character to rest, but we'll come back to that later. This was a plot point that Gene Roddenberry apparently hated, and this was leaked at a convention in England, allegedly by his secretary. As a result of this leak, there was backlash from fans who wrote angry letters to the studio and to Nimoy himself, who also received death threats, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It was also revealed that the death scene took place early on in the movie. So, Meyer came up with a Kobayashi Maru training sequence to throw the viewer off the scent with Spock dying in the simulator. Kirk also says,
"Aren't you dead?"
This line was to hammer home that the leak was false, until it wasn't. I believe this was a masterstroke because it really did help to give weight to Spock's actual death scene, because the viewer really wasn't expecting it. As pre-production progressed, it was realised that nobody had approached Ricardo Montalban to return to the role of Khan. This could have been a disaster for the production, but luckily Montalban accepted the role and everything was right with the world once again. The Wrath of Khan originally was going to be titled The Revenge of Khan, but this was changed because of The Revenge of the Jedi, which in itself was changed to Return of the Jedi, because Jedis don't take revenge. Another title considered was The Undiscovered Country, which obviously was later used for Star Trek VI. It is an understatement to say that Meyer is a very well-educated man, and his love for literature is evident, adding depth to his films. The Wrath of Khan is a very different film to the motion picture. This is evident with the visual styles between the two directors, with the motion picture looking a little bit more clean and the Wrath of Khan much more darker. Wrath of Khan feels a little bit more grounded as well. Well, as grounded as a film set in space in the future can be. Another big difference is that The Wrath of Khan is a much more character-driven film, focusing on the conflicts within and between the main characters, with the more high-concept sci-fi plot being secondary. Kirk's characterization has a lot of depth in this film. When we first meet him, he's seen in silhouette, almost as a shadow being cast over the young cadets. However, he feels somewhat differently. At the start of the film, he's been moved upstairs behind a desk as an admiral at Starfleet operations, as he was at the start of the motion picture, but now he's overseeing the training of new cadets under the tutelage of Captain Spock, with the Enterprise now a training vessel. This contributes to his feelings of being old and past it, also feeling that he's almost being replaced somewhat by these younger cadets, yet feeling that they just aren't up to the task, expecting them to grow up too soon. He is on his own with his views of being past it, evident with Uhura's reaction to this line.
Galloping around the cosmos is a game for the young, Doctor.
Now, what is that supposed to mean?
At the start of the film, he feels isolated and alone, celebrating his 50th birthday by himself, until he's interrupted by Dr. McCoy. He feels as though the world is passing him by and he's outlived his usefulness, almost as though he's lost his grip on his own fate. A midlife crisis, if you will. McCoy, who again acts as Kirk's conscience and guide, as he did in the previous film, stresses that he needs to snap out of this and get back to doing what he does best before he really is too old. Spock also comments on this later in the film. Before Kirk boards the Enterprise, he makes it clear that he hates inspections because he's not on board the Enterprise to command, but to observe. Again, emphasising that he's losing his grip over the things that he deemed most important to him in life. He eventually has to take command when the Enterprise is forced into service due to the very strange message he receives from Carol Marcus, a former Flame, when her research station loses communication. So, they have to go and investigate. Kirk is now back to doing what he does best, but he's out of touch and he needs to find his feet once again. This is evident to how he reacts to his performance during the surprise attack by the Reliant upon the Enterprise, stating,
"They cobbled my britches down. I'm getting senile."
Kirk comes to realise that he's always taken the easiest route during his career, admitting to reprogramming the Kobayashi Maru test, allowing him to beat the simulator. This earned him a commendation for original thinking, as no one else had even tried to resolve the simulation in that way. Although, David does see this in a different way, stating that he cheated. In Kirk's mind, he resolved the situation by thinking outside of the box, being patted on the back for his ingenuity. However, this only helps to establish a mindset of not facing the most difficult of outcomes, such as death, head-on, and taking other actions to pretty much cheat death. He even admits this himself. In Kirk's mind, being faced with death with the prospect of losing wasn't something that he was willing to comprehend nor accept. Previously, he, with the help of his crew, would work to find a way out of difficult situations. The more he did this, the more naturally it came to him, or so he thought. There is an arrogance there that led him to believe that when he was younger, he was almost too good to fail. However, now that he is older and somewhat out of touch, he almost beats himself up by allowing Khan to get the better of him during the surprise attack. The reality is, no one technically won that battle, but Kirk and the Enterprise do come off a bit worse for wear. This hits Kirk hard, but instead of regressing, he learns from this and he begins to establish much of his former confidence. Later in the film, Kirk, aided by Spock, outsmarts Khan and gets the better of him. But does this make Kirk somewhat overconfident? When he's finally faced with death with someone close to him, it numbs him as it would do anyone else. For someone so experienced with a successful career behind him, death has finally caught up with him and he's ill prepared for it. By the end of the film, he's almost outgrown his ego as such, but although he does win, he pays a heavy price. Spock has very little to do during the course of the film, serving as a teacher to the cadets and more so to Saavik, played by Kirstie Alley. But when the Enterprise is in a life or death situation, he realises that he has no time to debate what needs to be done by attempting to fix the warp drive in a radiation-filled chamber. He states that he has no time to discuss this logically to McCoy, but logic does dictate that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one, and that he is the only one who can save the ship but must sacrifice himself to do so. Although you can argue that this is a very human reaction, this is also driven by logic. Kirk is oblivious to what is going on in the engine room, focusing on the situation on the bridge. He trusts that Scotty and the engineering team will get the warp drive fixed in the nick of time. This shows that Kirk needs his crew and he trusts the team around him, whereas Khan relies solely upon himself. Kirk is also introduced to his son David, whom he has no relationship with. David almost resents Kirk to begin with, but warms to him towards the end, seeing what kind of man Kirk really is. Kirk loses his close friend but gains a son. A new planet is born from the Genesis device, which is an allegory for rebirth. Kirk is almost renewed by the events, almost reborn himself. Spock wanted Kirk to embrace life and not run away from his own mortality. There are hints to this when he gifts Kirk a copy of A Tale of Two Cities. The opening paragraph starting with, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." This opening paragraph in the book almost foreshadows the film's events, with two opposites existing at the same time. You may think that this is Kirk and Khan, two opposing enemies, but it's more foreshadowing Spock's demise. Spock is almost the opposite of Kirk by nature. In the book, Sidney Carton sacrifices himself to save his friend so that he can escape to England and a place of safety. Spock does the same, sacrificing himself and saving the ship, but also to allow Kirk a second chance in the face of certain doom. Also in the book, the character of Dr. Manet is released from prison and is practically reborn with a new life after his release. Kirk and Khan are also in prison to a certain extent. Kirk is imprisoned within his role as Admiral at Starfleet Operations and is reborn during the events of the film. Khan is imprisoned on Ceti Alpha 5 and later escapes, gaining control of the Genesis device, a device capable of reorganising life on a planetary scale, a device to allow a planet to be reborn. Although Spock does remark that there was no message with giving Kirk the book, I believe that there was. Spock is a logical man and doesn't do anything without design. He knows that Kirk is experiencing a midlife crisis, and the book is to serve as a reminder of how short life is, a message that Kirk understands at the end of the film. One of the final lines in the film is also the final sentence in the book. In Spock's quarters, they also discuss that Kirk accepted promotion too soon, and that his destiny was to command a starship. Spock is encouraging Kirk to live his best life. Kirk remarks that he feels young at the very end of the film, and now is also no longer alone and isolated, something that he felt at the start of the film. Spock's death scene is done so well and is really tragic. The two are separated by glass so that Kirk couldn't even embrace his friend in his final moments. Spock is the one who ends up isolated. He jokes that he never took the Kobayashi Maru test until now, and he asks Kirk what he thinks of his solution, knowing that as the commander, he is responsible for the lives on board the ship and he should be the one to sacrifice himself to save everyone else. It really is a death scene with so much weight and emotion. After test screenings of the film, Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett noted that the movie lacked hope by the end. The fans' reaction to Spock's death being final just wasn't what they wanted to see, and they sought hope that Spock may come back at some point. Nimoy stated that he enjoyed playing Spock once again in this film and that he wasn't 100% prepared to say goodbye to the character after all. So, without the approval of Nicholas Meyer, additional scenes were shot that included the mind meld to McCoy and Spock's torpedo casket on the Genesis planet to leave the door open for a Spock return. This was something that Meyer strongly disagreed with, stating that Spock's death should have been final. There are heavy themes of life, death and friendship present within the film, as well as negative emotions that lead a man down the path of revenge whilst being blinded by rage. Khan was marooned on Ceti Alpha 5 with his followers and his new love that would become his wife. Instead of Kirk throwing them into the brig for attempting to steal his ship and kill him, he gave them a second chance for life on a new world. However, this didn't exactly go to plan for Khan and co. Kirk never checked in on them and left them to fend for themselves. Ceti Alpha 6 exploded, causing a shockwave that killed almost all life on their planet, as well as altering its orbit around their sun. The planet became a wasteland, with every day a struggle to survive. My only gripe here is, how did Starfleet not know about this? I might be nitpicking here though. During the early investigations for locations to test the newly developed Genesis device, which is a terraforming torpedo that rewrites matter to create a brand new world, the Reliant happens upon the marooned crew of the Botany Bay. They have had hard struggles to survive, resulting in the deaths of many of Khan's followers, including his wife, something that he blames Kirk for. This has driven Khan to madness, and now that he has the opportunity to exact revenge, he grabs that opportunity with both hands. Another point here, it is noted that Chekhov wasn't even in Space Seed, yet Khan recognises him. I think this can be explained away with Chekhov being on another part of the ship at the time and we just never saw him on screen. It's one of those situations when you just need to look past these details and just enjoy the film. Khan starts out as cold and calculating, with an almost sombre demeanour. It isn't until he sees the Enterprise on his view screen that he becomes much more animated, almost to the point of psychotic. His excitement grows as he'll soon be face to face via a view screen with the man that he's dreamed of destroying. The surprise attack is shown from both Kirk and Khan's perspectives. The way in which both bridges are lit help to outline that Khan is initially in control, almost to the point of overconfidence, as he toys with his opponent. Reliance Bridge is brightly lit, whereas Enterprise's is dark with a red tone. Enterprise's lighting also outlines two things. Firstly, they are the victim, bloodied and battered. But the second is that this is what Khan sees when he's communicating with Kirk via the view screen. Khan is filled with anger, seeing Kirk through metaphorical red mist. He sees Kirk bathed in dark red light through his view screen in a state of rage. As the film continues on, Khan becomes more and more filled with anger. He is an intelligent man with a superior intellect due to his genetic engineering. However, his rage and want for revenge clouds any rational thinking, driving him almost insane. Very much like Captain Ahab hunting his white whale Moby Dick. Kirk is Khan's white whale. As with Moby Dick, he represents a goal for Khan to overcome, a goal that is unattainable due to his state of mind and irrational thinking. As with Captain Ahab, Khan ultimately succumbs to his white whale. Khan had the power of Genesis at his fingertips, but overlooks this newly acquired power in order to reap his revenge upon Kirk, but this is his ultimate downfall. Khan underestimates Kirk, believing himself to be superior, another mindset that aids with his downfall. Something of note is that Kirk and Khan are never physically on screen at the same time. The closest we get is when Khan is on the Enterprise view screen with Kirk in the foreground. This was due to Ricardo Montalban's filming schedule, who was also starring in Fantasy Island at the same time. William Shatner's schedule also prevented him from filming when Montalban was available, so Bennett, Soyard and Meyer worked around this, becoming something of a happy accident. Both performances are excellent, with their interactions more impressive when you realise that they're not directly acting against one another. The chase between Khan and Kirk is something of a game of cat and mouse, which doesn't end with the two characters ending up in a physical fistfight. Instead, it is the Enterprise and the Reliant that do the physical fighting on screen. And a final face-to-face showdown between the two just wasn't needed, as this approach developed into more of a battle of wits. The end battle in the Mutara Nebula was more like a submarine engagement, quite similar to the TOS episode Balance of Terror. In the Nebula, both are blinded, so have to rely on their own senses. Kirk wins out not only due to his experience, but the experience of his trusted crew. As with the motion picture, the rest of the TOS cast have very little to do, with the exception of Chekhov and Scotty to an extent. Chekhov is much more interwoven within the story, being brainwashed by Khan with the SETI ills, something that really freaked me out when I was younger, by the way. Chekhov helps to reel Kirk in by aiding in setting things in motion for Khan to strike. In the director's cut, it is revealed that the young Peter Pressman is Scotty's nephew, which hits Scotty hard when he dies after the surprise attack of the Reliant. I always found this heartbreaking to see Scotty break down. As mentioned before, McCoy serves much the same role as he did in the motion picture, being Kirk's trusted guide. The trifecta of Kirk, Spock and McCoy is played upon a little more in this film, but Kirk certainly takes centre stage. There was also a drop plot point of Sulu becoming the captain of the new Excelsior, which was discussed in a deleted scene set on a shuttle heading to the Enterprise near the start of the film. Sulu takes the helm of the Enterprise as a final favour to Kirk before moving on to his own command. This was a plot point picked up again for Star Trek VI. The Wrath Khan is certainly filled with very human themes, unlike the motion picture. The performances in this film are excellent, with the drama taking precedent over an effects-driven spectacle. That said, the visuals produced by ILM are excellent, but it is noticeable when the budget restricted certain things. The biggest example of this are the reused shots of the Enterprise in dry dock from the motion picture. The sequence was originally supposed to be the Enterprise in space dock, which was introduced in Star Trek 3, but budget restrictions didn't allow for this. The Earth station from the motion picture was also repurposed for the regular one station, just turned upside down. As you'd expect from ILM, the work they did on the visuals was excellent. The initial sneak attack of the Reliant on the Enterprise and the Mutara Nebula sequences are just outstanding, even if the Reliant is technically upside down due to Harve Bennett signing off the design the wrong way round. Until this film, we only ever saw other Federation starships that were Constitution class. This was for cost-cutting reasons, so it was great to see another Federation starship that looked distinctively different, but also looks like it's from the same fleet. The ship designs from ILM were great in both this film and the next one. One very notable sequence was the Genesis test simulation. This was the first ever fully CGI sequence in a motion picture, produced by a division of Lucasfilm that went on to become Pixar. Another key factor in why this movie is so good is the musical score by James Horner. Horner blended swashbuckling themes with more nautical-esque motifs to aid the storytelling and the visual style that Meyer was going for. The score also carried over some subtle motifs from the original series, as well as from Jerry Goldsmith's score from the motion picture. I absolutely loved James Horner's work here, and I loved how his score was expanded upon in Star Trek 3. I appreciate that there are some similarities with other James Horner scores, such as from Battle Beyond the Stars, but this is vintage Horner and it works incredibly well for this film. The Star Trek film series does have a bit of a mismatch of musical scores, and I wish Horner had returned to score Star Treks 4 and 6, as his work is my personal favourite. For a lot of fans, Jerry Goldsmith's work is the quintessential Star Trek theme, but James Horner's scores are what I hear in my head when I think of the TOS film series. To summarise, this film sets the bar very high for future movies in the franchise and has yet to be topped. There have been attempts to copy and replicate Rafa Khan a few times, which ultimately failed. The biggest examples of this are Nemesis and Into Darkness. There are many themes reused for First Contact, especially with the Moby Dick references, but this was handled in a very good way, and I don't see First Contact as a Rafa Khan clone. In the UK, upon release, the film had a 15 rating, mainly because of the Seti eel scene and the bloody depiction of the dead bodies on the regular one station. This also showed the sheer brutality of Khan's maddening state. The Rafa Khan was met with positive reviews and pretty much saved the franchise. Although it didn't quite make as much as the motion picture, 97 million from a 12 million budget, it was far more profitable. Like its predecessor, it continued the trend of establishing certain aspects for future Trek, such as the uniforms and establishing Starfleet as a more militaristic organisation. It's the only film in the TOS and the TNG movie series that doesn't feature Klingons, although footage of the Klingon battle cruisers from the motion picture are used on the Kobayashi Maru simulator. The Rafa Khan is held in high regard, especially amongst Star Trek fans, and is capable of holding its own against many other successful films in the sci-fi genre. But where do you go from here? Well, there's only one way to find out. I've been Colm from the Critical Cinema Club, and I'll see you next time.